once again to the annual Shelley Rudoff Memorial Lecture, sponsored by the OU and by the Beth Din of America. It's been an eventful year, a difficult year for all of us. Since we last met, we, for the first time as a Beth Din, experienced doing Gittin outdoors, something that we don't usually do, doing mediations and Dinei Torah, arbitrations over Zoom. But I'm happy to report that the Beth Din of America was able to adapt to these difficult circumstances, and we're continuing to offer our vital, important services to the community during this time. And I'm glad that once again we're able to come together for this annual tribute to the memory of Shelley Rudoff, who led the Beth Din of America at the inception of its modern era. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention at this point the passing just over the last few weeks, a few weeks ago, of our Av Beis Din, Rav Gedalia Schwartz, who led the Beth Din of America since 1991. So he was there at the very, during the beginning and during the involvement of Shelley in kind of reconstituting the Beth Din. Rabbi Schwartz was a towering Torah personality, and he led the Beth Din of America to great heights during his 30 years of leadership. If anyone is interested, there will be a shloshim sponsored by a number of organizations, including the Beth Din of America, including the OU and the Chicago Rabbinical Council tomorrow night. If you're interested in joining that, you could go to our blog on our website, www.bethdin.org, and just scroll down to the second entry on the blog. It's at 8 p.m. New York time tomorrow night. We're grateful to Hedda and to the Rudoff family each year for allowing us to pay tribute to Shelley's memory and to demonstrate our very deep and very sincere hakaras hatov to him for his everlasting contribution to the Jewish community, having established and set up the Beth Din America to do the important work that it does. So at this point, I would like to turn over the microphone to Hedda, who will introduce Rabbi Levine, our speaker. And again, I thank you all for coming. Thank you again to the Rudoff family for giving this opportunity to us to pay tribute to Shelley Rudoff.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Weissman. I really appreciate your words. And I want to echo and give my own welcome to all friends and family tonight. And I so appreciate your support of this particular shir that we give annually. And as this year we decided, yes, we're going to do it on Zoom. We usually do it at the Jewish Center, and they've been wonderful about letting us use their facilities. And I'm very grateful to the Jewish Center for, among other things, but for that as well. And so as Rabbi Weissman said, Shelley was a president of the Beth Din. He was also president of the OU, and he was very much involved in community affairs. And he was on the board of Yeshiva University, of which he was a graduate and a musmach. And even though he spent a lot of time and effort on all these organizations, of course, he was a practicing lawyer, but he was never remiss about his family involvement as well. And he was a wonderful, devoted husband, father, son, brother, grandfather, uncle. And so he really fulfilled all those roles. And we miss him very much, all of us. We talk about him quite often, and we're happy that we can have this commemoration. It's the 9th Yortzeit that we have annually. I want to say a few words about Rabbi Levine, because that's what I'm doing here, is introducing him. And I'm just going to spend a few words. I don't want to take away from his shir. I'm very anxious to hear it, and I'm sure you all are as well. But I do want to say that, of course, Rabbi Levine is my rabbi of the Jewish Center. But not only is he my rabbi, but he's also a wonderful teacher and also a very dear friend. And I also want to acknowledge the amazing work that the Jewish Center has done, particularly in this challenging and difficult year, in bringing wonderful shiurim, even more shiurim than I think in the past, and other wonderful programs that they have, both fun programs and programs to support people who are isolated and give them some kind of chizuk and involvement. And so I'm so appreciative that Rabbi Levine, even though he's got this amazing busy schedule, that he has accepted my request to speak tonight. And I am so appreciative of that. So without any further ado, I want to give the floor, or rather the screen, to Rabbi Levine. Thank you all.
Thank you, Hedda. Thank you so much for those very kind words. I learn with you on such a regular basis, and I learn so much from you. So it's wonderful to have the opportunity to do a little learning with you and a little wider audience tonight. I want to thank Rabbi Weissman for everything that you do for the Beth Din of America. It's such a wonderful organization, and we're always so honored to partner with you. It's an honor, it's a personal honor to deliver tonight's lecture in Shelley's memory. That so many of you who knew him are here is fitting tribute to a man who was a role model for his family, for Jewish communal servants, and for anyone who had the good fortune to come within his Dalet Amos. I'm looking at all the screens, it's just scrolling through a little, and it brings me so much joy to see you. If my Wi-Fi conked out right now and all we had was this opportunity to see each other, I would say Dayenu. That itself would be such a bracha and such a lift. Hopefully the Wi-Fi won't conk out. I just want to pause very, very briefly to say a word about current events. I think they're, without a doubt, they're on all of our minds, and I think I would be remiss if I let the moment pass without just saying one word. I want to say personally, today was a very sad day. I consider myself a very proud American citizen. I have a tremendous hakaras hatov for everything that this extraordinary nation has given to my family, my grandparents, my parents, to my family, what I hope it will continue to give my children. As members of the Jewish people, as members of the Jewish community, we believe very deeply in the notion of Kedusha. We believe very deeply in the notion of holiness, of sanctity. And some institutions and some places are sacred. And in my mind, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that an assault on our capital is an assault on our democracy and is an assault on something we hold to be sacred. And it pains me. It pains me very deeply. It should go without saying that we condemn the president for inciting it and his enablers for allowing it, and the people who are responsible for protesting and the damage that they've done and the desecration, I think that is the word. We condemn it all in the strongest possible terms. It's a busha. It's a busha to think that this is going on in our country. And I just share with you a bracha. We say every day, and maybe we should have more kavana, and it'll mean something more. It's the first bracha. We get to shul, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Asher nasan l'sachvi v'ina l'avchin ben yom v'ben layla. It should be so obvious. We say a bracha to Hashem for giving us the capacity to tell the difference between day and night. It's obvious. Everyone knows that was day, this is night. Why do we need? Isn't it obvious? And sometimes we need Hashem to give us that wisdom. And that's the bracha that I just, and I ad kan my remarks on current events, but Hashem should bless every American citizen, every member of this country, with the wisdom to be able to tell the difference between what is yom and what is light. There is a source sheet for tonight. Hopefully you received it earlier today by email. Because of a technical glitch, I'm not able to put it in the chat. As a general matter, I prefer not to have to share the screen so that I can keep seeing you, and then we can keep seeing each other. From time to time, I'll share the sources. If you don't have it in front of you, don't worry about it. It's okay. Nothing's writing on it. And obviously, if anyone needs the notes before the final exam, we'll make sure that they are available. There's something ironic about studying tonight's topic over Zoom. There are many things that Zoom has enabled us to do over the past 10 months, and we're very grateful to have it. But one thing that's all but impossible to do over Zoom is communicate empathy. And so we'll just have to resolve that at the first possible opportunity, we'll get together in person, we'll see each other, and we'll be able to make up for all the times when empathy was called for, but we couldn't express it. The Ramchal writes in his introduction, you have it on your source sheets, source number 1. He says, in the second line, Ki lo simtza barov b'tvarai, ela b'dvarim sherov b'nei ha'adam yodim osam v'lo mistapkim b'hem klal. He says, basically my whole book, everything I'm going to say here, it's obvious. There's nothing here anybody has any questions about. You should be self-aware, and you should be kind, and you should live a life with a sense of purpose, and you should live a life with a sense of holiness. We got it. Says though that certain values are so obvious, they're so axiomatic that we never stop to spell them out. Precisely because we presume they're self-evident, we don't give them the attention they're due. Empathy falls squarely into this category. We all know we should be more empathic. But like the Ramchal writes, sometimes it's important to revisit topics that we take for granted, to remind ourselves of that which we already know, and hopefully by looking at a familiar topic through a slightly less familiar lens, we'll open up some avenues for thought that I hope will be instructive, if not provocative. So, I wanted to begin by asking you a question. The chat is disabled, so if anybody wants to raise their hand, I'm happy to call on you. My question is, and of course you could just imagine in your own mind the answer to this question. The question is, how do you say empathy in Hebrew? Now someone's going to raise their hand and say, empatia. Okay, so we got it. We understand how to say empathy in modern Hebrew, and 10 points for anyone who knew the word in modern Hebrew for empathy. But my question is really, how do you say empathy in biblical Hebrew, or if you want, in Mishnaic Hebrew or Rabbinic Hebrew? What is the Torah's term? What's the rabbinic term? What's the halachic term, if you like, for empathy? You could answer, again, you could raise your hand if people are able to do that, with an actual, a term, a word, a phrase, a paragraph, a pasuk. Think in your mind, just imagine if you can, what word comes to mind? I don't think you need to be a philologist to know that empathy is from the Greek. Pathos means feeling, empathy means with feeling. My aunt is on the line. I didn't ask her to participate. She's raising her hand. So, Marcy, do you want to unmute yourself and make a suggestion about the Hebrew word?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of nafsho, kshura b'nafsho, but that's mentioned only twice in Tanakh.
Okay, so, beautiful. I think that's a nice suggestion. The idea that,
but that's it. That's it.
Bound up with each other, like Binyamin and Yaakov, nafsho, kshura b'nafsho. Beautiful. Any other suggestions? I can only see 25 screens at a time. Ira, I see you raising your hand. That's Ira Morrow. Let me ask you if you can unmute. Do you have a suggestion for us?
Yes. A phrase, but v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha.
Beautiful. Okay. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. I think that's always a great place to start. Any others? Take maybe one more suggestion, if there is one. Any takers? I'm sorry if I can't see everyone. Ah, we got one there. Shoshana and Beth. I'm unmuting you.
Yeah, I think Rachamim from Rechem. That's the place of compassion and empathy.
Great, Rachamim. Yeah, Rabbi Young, my predecessor, used to translate Rachamim or Rachmanut as mother love, right? That it's not just compassion, but there's something even deeper about Rachamim. So I just asked to engage in this exercise. We'll take one more because I see Scott's got his hand up. Scott, you got something for us?
Chesed.
Chesed. Okay, great. So loving kindness, we would say is chesed. So I just asked to go through this exercise because these are all right answers, but it should just catch our attention that there's not any really more specific word for empathy, right? And it's a little conspicuous. We can talk about it, we can talk around it. Ahava, v'ahavta re'acha kamocha, chesed, rachamim, nafshok, shirab, all right. But where is empathy, and how striking it is that we don't have an actual word for empathy in the Torah or in rabbinic Hebrew. So look, there are a lot of ways to enter this discussion. I want to begin tonight with what might be considered the locus classicus on this topic. It's the Gemara on Tainis Daf Yud Aleph. I'm just going to read a couple highlights for you. It's on your source sheet as source number 2. Amar Reish Lakish asur la'adam l'shamish mitzaso b'shnei ra'avon shene'amar liYosef yalad shnei banim b'terem tavo shnas harav. A lot of things we skip in grade school. We certainly skipped this Gemara in grade school. The Gemara says there's a halacha about when a husband and wife are allowed to be together. There are many halachos about when a husband and wife are allowed to be together. One of them is, at a time when there's a famine, a husband and wife are not allowed to be together. They have to abstain. So why is that? Look at Rashi, source number 3. Asur l'shamish mitzaso b'shnei ra'avon tetzarech adam linhog tsar bi'atzmo. A person needs to feel pain at a time when there's communal suffering, and it's not the time to feel something other than pain. Okay. So the Gemara says, right, Reish Lakish says, where do I know this from? It sounds intuitive, but where is the source for this? The source is from Yosef. How do you know the source is from Yosef? Because if you go back to the Psukim, you'll notice that the Torah tells us that Yosef and his wife had 2 children, and when did they have them? Right before the Torah tells us that there were years of famine. Yosef knew what was coming. So it had seven fat years followed by 7 lean years. So before the lean years came, he had children. And then when the lean years began, no more children. So a proof from Yosef that a husband and a wife separate during years of famine. Gemara continues. Might be an exception if someone doesn't need to have children. Okay. Tana Rabbanan, 3rd paragraph. Bisman she'Yisrael shurim b'tzar u'pirush achamehem ba'in shnei malachei sharash she'melabin lo la'adam u'manichen lo yideam al rosha. This is great. Did you know this? Did you know that every person has 2 malachim that follow them around all the time? Okay, so that itself is worth knowing. The Gemara says that at a time when the Jewish people are suffering, if a person separates himself from the community, you know what happens? The 2 malachim go over to the person, they put their hands on his head, va'omrim, and they say, Ploni zeh shepirish min hatzibur al yira b'nechamas tzibur. This person who separated himself from the pain, from the discomfort of the people at their time of distress, that person is not going to see the salvation. He's not going to be there when the distress comes to an end. Continue for a moment, skip to that last paragraph. What is a person supposed to do when there's distress in the world? Ella yitzar adam im hatzibur. A person should suffer along with the community. What's the proof? How do you know that? Shekain matzina b'Moshe Rabbeinu. For Moshe, what did Moshe do? Shetzir atzmo im hatzibur. That's exactly what he did. He suffered along with the people. Remember the story, the very end of Parshas Beshalach, the Jewish people have been ambushed by the nation of Amalek, and Yoshua goes out to fight the battle, and Moshe stays back and he puts his hands up in the air and he davens and he goes like this. And then the Torah tells us, Videi Moshe kvedim. His hands go like this for a long time, hands get heavy. So he was feeling that his hands were becoming heavy. So they brought him a stone, he sat down on the stone. This is like one of my favorite lines of all time from the Gemara. The Gemara said, really? That's what they did? That was the big solution? They brought him a stone? I couldn't rustle up one pillow, one cushion, one chair, one decent place for Moshe Rabbeinu to sit. They sat him on a stone? No. The Gemara says you misunderstood. They had a cushion. They had a pillow. They had a chair. Moshe declined. Elakach Amar Moshe. Moshe said, I'm not doing it. Hawil v'Yisrael shrim b'tzar afani ya'iman b'tzar. If they're on the battlefield, they're in distress, they're suffering, I'm going to suffer too. Don't give me someplace comfortable to sit. I don't want it. The person who suffers the pain with the community, that person experiences the salvation of the community. Okay. So my question is, the question I want to think about tonight. We have lots of examples, lots of places in Tanakh that we could think of where someone was empathic, where someone joined the pain of the community. Lots of people we could point to. Why does the Gemara single out these two individuals, Yosef and Moshe? That's the question I want to sit with for just a minute. So now I want to go back. Okay? Now I want to go back to what I think is really the biblical basis for empathy. And I want to take you back to Parshas Mishpatim, Psukim that we've seen 1,000 times. We know them by heart. Most of what I want to learn tonight is really just Chumash and Rashi. I want to make just one very subtle observation, and I hope it will shed light on tonight's topic. And I apologize that this will only be comprehensible to people who are not multitasking. Okay, so bonus points for people who have the video on, bonus people who are listening with undivided attention. These are the 4 psukim I want to learn with you. You ready? Parshas Mishpatim, Perek Chav Beis. V'ger lo soneh v'lo silchatzenu. Don't oppress the stranger. Don't wrong the stranger. Don't abuse him. Ki gerim heyusim be'eretz Mitzrayim. We know this pasuk, right? Because you were gerim. You were strangers in a strange land. You were strangers in Egypt. You know what it's like. You've been there. So have some empathy. Understand what it's like to be a ger, and don't oppress the ger. Continue. Kol almana v'yasam lo son. And you know who else you shouldn't oppress? The widow and the orphan. It's said more than any other, right? The Gemara says repeated more often the command not to oppress the ger, repeated more often than any other ethic in the Torah. Not just the ger, but also the yasam and the almana, the widow and the orphan. Don't oppress them. Imanet haneoso. If you do oppress them, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Hashem says, Kim tza'oki tza'kelai. They are going to call out to me. Shamoa eshma tza'kaso. I'm going to hear them. B'charapi. I'm going to get very upset. B'haragti eschem b'charev. I'm going to kill you. Another pasuk we skip in grade school. V'hayu neshechem almanos. And you know what's going to happen? Your wives are going to become widows. V'nechem yisam. Your kids are going to become orphans. Now, that is quite the formulation. It should strike us as more than a little odd that the punishment here is, wow, Hashem is gonna kill us. I didn't think this was one of the, a capital crime. For the record, by the way, what the Torah means here is not that oppressing a widow or an orphan is a capital crime like murder. It's a separate category. Beis Din's not going to mete out this punishment. This is what we call misa bidei shamayim. Hashem says, I'm going to take care of this one personally. But I want to ask a slightly different question. It's actually Rashi's question. You have it here in source number 6. Rashi writes the following. He says, Hashem promises, if you mess with the widow and the orphan, I'm going to kill you. Your wives are going to become widows. Your kids are going to become orphans. He says, Eini yodeh sheneshechem almanus uvnechem yisomim. You just told me 1 second ago that someone oppresses the widow and the orphan, you're going to kill them. Okay, so Rashi says, I got it. If they're dead, they have a wife, she's going to be alone. If they have kids, they're going to be, I got it. Why do you need to repeat the fact that you're going to kill the person and the family is going to be left bereft? That's what happens when a person is killed. So what I want to do is answer this question, and I want to ask you to reimagine these psukim. There are many answers to this question. Maybe the Torah is really telling us that the punishment is going to be more severe. Maybe the Torah is showing us, that divine justice operates midah keneged midah, it's measure for measure. You messed with an almana and a yasam, so Hashem is going to pay you back by creating an almana and a yasam. I just want to ask you to look at these psukim from a slightly different perspective. Okay, I'm just going to share screen for a second, and hopefully everyone will be able to see this. Okay, this is source number 7 on your sheets. Okay. So the punctuation actually throws us off a little, and I just want you to break it up. There's a right-hand column and a left-hand column. And what I want you to notice is that they're parallel. V'ger lo soneh v'lo silchatzenu. Don't oppress the stranger, right-hand column. Left-hand column, why? Ki gerim hayisim be'eretz Mitzrayim. Because you know what it's like, because you were slaves in Egypt. Okay. First injunction. Second injunction, kol almana v'yasam lo avsanu mimenes. Don't mess with the almana and the yasam. Left-hand column, not what's going to happen to you, but even more than what's going to happen to you, why? The word ki, right? Ki means because. Because if you do that, then this is what happens. I'm going to hear them. That's the consequence. The Torah is telling us that we have to call on our own experience to have empathy for the ger. Point number 1. And then what the Torah is telling us, if you don't have the experience yourself, then you need to conjure it up, as painful as it may be. Point number 1, empathy for the ger. That's easy. You did it, you lived it, you have the experience. So you could turn to your own story to know how to be empathic to someone else who's in the same position. But if you can't turn to your own story, then you can turn to your own imagination. And Hashem, in very stark terms, is saying, I just want you to pause and think, God forbid, what it would be like. Just pause for 1 second, because we never do this. Pause for 1 second and think, what would it be like if it happened to you? What would it be like if in your family, this was the reality? It's actually what Rashi says in the next line, because it's the next pasuk. It's the same ethic. It's all part of one stream of thought. The Torah goes on. It's the very next pasuk, pasuk Chavdal. It's the next source, source A. Im kesef talveh asami esani imach lo sielo kenosha lo sisimon alav neshech. Read the pasuk quickly. Someone's poor, give them a loan, don't charge interest. Beautiful, wonderful mitzvah. Help out somebody who's in distress. The pauper needs money, give him a loan. Very nice. But there's an extra word in the pasuk. Rashi notices right away. Es ha'ani imach, the pauper who's with you. What does it mean he's with you? Obviously he's with you. He came to you for a loan. He's with you. We got it. Rashi. Es ha'ani imach, source number 9. Have mistakel bi'atzmecha ki'ilu atah ha'ani. You know what the Torah is telling you? Black on white. He's with you. You could switch places in a second. That could be you. Imagine you're the ani. And then decide how much you're going to give him. Then decide how much you're going to charge him. That's empathy. Empathy means you actually stop and envision what it might be like to be another person. Do the right thing, help him out, because that could be you. That's what we're after. Social scientists like to talk about the difference between emotional empathy, cognitive empathy. I think we might call this difference the difference between experiential empathy an imagined empathy, or if you like, empathy that's built up from living, and empathy that's built up from learning. There's a capacity for empathy that comes from my lived experience. I lost my mother, so I can empathize with someone who's lost a parent. I've been there. I've not been the victim of racism, so my capacity for empathy for someone who has to be cultivated. I have to develop it by going through the work of trying to understand what that experience is really like. The Torah really wants us to picture what it would be like if, God forbid, this were us. Just imagine for a moment. That's empathy. To put ourselves in that place and imagine what it would be like. That's what Rashi says, by the way, on the Psukim we just read. The source number 7, he says, Kol almanav yason los anun, don't oppress the widow and orphan. He says, Hu adin l'chol adam. It's nothing to do with the widow and orphan. It's true about any human being. These are people who are often vulnerable, so they are often in a position where they might be oppressed or might be abused, but that's anyone. Don't just be empathetic toward the Yasom and the Almana, any human being. That's our duty, that's our obligation, that's our responsibility directly from the Torah to express empathy and act accordingly. Sometimes our own experience has positioned us to be empathetic, and sometimes it hasn't. And it's in those situations that we need to put in the extra work to make ourselves empathic. I want to tell you a story about Rabbi Levine. I have a couple sources here. In source number 11 is a postage stamp, and this is actually a letter from like the Department of Prisons. This was published, I put it in, because it's interesting, but I put it in also because it was published in Jewish Action on the 50th yard site. On the 50th yard site of Aryeh Levine. He died in 1960. They did an interview with his grandson, and it should be clickable. If you have the source sheet, you should be able to find the interview, or just Google Rabbi Aryeh Levine, Jewish Action. Everyone knows the stories about Rabbi Aryeh Levine, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. They're legendary. There's no family relation. He spelled his name, I guess, whenever he spoke, spelled it in English. To the extent he ever spelled it in English, it was without an E. But certainly crossed our minds when we named Ari that he would bear the name of the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. He lived in a tiny apartment in the neighborhood that today is known as Nachlaot, and he loved everyone, whatever their affiliation. So he used to visit the prisons and befriend the convicts. There was a this was a hospital for lepers in Talbia. He used to go and visit the lepers. He used to befriend anyone. One time, this is not the story I want to share, but just to give you a sense of who he was. One time, there was a teenager who was walking down the street of Aryeh Levine, was coming in his direction, and he saw the kid like turn and go the other way. And Rabbi Aryeh Levine kind of caught up with him. He says, "Why are you avoiding me?" And the kid was like a little embarrassed. He said, I didn't want you to see me. You were at my bris, you're at my bar mitzvah, you know my family, and I don't do that anymore. I'm not observant. I was embarrassed. I didn't want you to see me without a yarmulke. Rabbi Aryeh Levine said, I'm very short. I can't see what's on anyone's head. I'm not looking there. I just see what's in your heart. Okay, that's who Aryeh Levine. That's who Aryeh Levine was. So I want to tell you this story. If you remember one thing from tonight's shir, just remember this story. It says the whole shir. Aryeh Levine lived in this neighborhood called Nachlaot. Shabbos was very important to Aryeh Levine, and he always used to go around to the shopkeepers, and he would say, I know you're not particularly observant. Maybe you could consider, closing your store on Shabbos. It would be so nice if the whole street was closed, and it's Yerushalayim, it's a holy city. Maybe you could close your store on Shabbos. And over time, he is a very persuasive guy. He was a tzaddik, and a lot of stores closed on Friday night. They closed for Shabbos. There's one particular store owner that he just never closed. He was always open on Shabbos. Story goes like this: one Friday night, Aryeh Levine, dressed for Shabbos. It's time for shul. He leaves his house. Let's say normally make a left turn out of his apartment to go to shul. So he turns right, and he doesn't go to shul. He walks to the owner of this. He walks to the store owner, to this little shop that's open on Shabbos. He walks in the shop and he says, Shabbat Shalom. And the store owner says, Shabbat Shalom. They have a nice relationship. And Rabbi Levine says, can I ask a favor? Would you mind if I just sat and rested in the back of your store for a little while? And the shopkeeper said, of course, I'm so honored. You're a tzaddik. I'd be honored to have you sit in my store, whatever you need. And he pulled a little stool up, and Rabbi Levine sat in the corner of the store. And 10 minutes go by, 20 minutes go by, half an hour goes by, an hour goes by. By this point, shul is long since over. And Rabbi Levine is sitting there, and he's just watching. And customers come in, and they buy cigarettes, and they buy newspapers, and they buy candy, and they buy groceries. And finally, after about an hour of sitting and watching this, he gets up, he goes over to the storekeeper, and he says, thank you so much for letting me sit in your store. Shabbat Shalom. And the store owner says, Shabbat Shalom. He's so perplexed by this behavior. Sunday morning, he walks over down the block to Rabbi Levine's apartment. He knocks on the door, and he says, Kvod Harav, could you just tell me what that was all about? What were you doing in my store on Friday night? And Rabbi Levine said, I'll explain. He says, you and I have spoken many times. I've asked you to close your store on Shabbos, and you always said no, and we talked about it. I wanted to understand for myself. I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to know what it was like for you to make this decision. I wanted to understand what it means to you to be open on Shabbos. I wanted to see with my own eyes what I was asking you to give up. Now I realize how difficult it is for you. I see how much business you do on Friday night, the relationships you have with the customers, and I now understand what it would mean for you to close your store on Shabbos. Now I get it. That's the end of the story. Whether he closed the store, I don't know. But the point is, those are the lengths to which Rabbi Levine went to understand what another Jew was going through. Maybe now we're in a position to answer our question. Why are Yosef and Moshe, the Gemara's role models for empathy in the Torah? Maybe they're our exemplars because they were models for both kinds of empathy. Lots of people have one or the other, but Moshe and Yosef, the lived empathy and the learned empathy. Start with Moshe. Okay, he has the experience, right? He tells us this right off the bat. Just look at source number 12. Why does he name his son Gershom? He tells you, Ki amar ger hayisi be'eretz nochriya. Because I was a ger. So that's my lived experience. I was also a ger. By the way, I'll just share with you briefly, source number 13. There's a beautiful comment by Rav David Tzvi Hoffman. Rav David Tzvi Hoffman has a lot of Jewish Center connections. He was the Rabbi of Rabbi Dr. Leo Young. And Rabbi Dr. Leo Young had smicha from at least 3 people, including Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook. And he always said the smicha he got from Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, that was the smicha that he cherished the most. Rav David Tzvi Hoffman has a beautiful comment. He says, you have to understand the grammar. You could see it in source number 13, if you have the source sheet. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't just referring to being a ger in Midian, he was referring to being a ger in Mitzrayim. Amazing. He was royalty. He says, no, that's not how Moshe conceived of himself. Even when he was living in Paro's palace, he conceived of himself as a ger, as an outsider. That's why it's in the past tense, right? It should say in the present tense, ki amar ger hayisi. What do you mean he was? He's in Midian now. No, he's speaking in the past tense because he's saying, I have been and continue to be. I always have been a ger. Not just now when I'm in Midian as a refugee, but even when I was in Mitzrayim, I was an outsider. Because I never belonged to the house of Paro. I always identified with Bnei Israel. That's part 1. Moshe had the lived experience of being the outsider so he could empathize with Bnei Israel. But more than that, he actively sought out ways to develop that empathy. So, right, this is from our Parsha. Source number 14. So what does that mean that Moshe saw the suffering of his brethren? I want to share with you a beautiful medrash. You have it in source number 15. I'll just read you a couple excerpts from this medrash. What does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu saw the suffering of the Jewish people? So the medrash, source number 15. Just join me, if you have it, on the third line, or the second line. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu Alpha Pishaya B'Paltin Shel Paro. Even though Moshe was in the palace of Paro, Halach Liros B'Siflo San Shel Yisrael. He went out to see the suffering of the Jews. Hainu Titnan Hillel Omer Al Tifrosh Min HaTzibor. Right, based on the Gemara we just saw, right? Hillel had always said, that's the mission of it. Don't separate yourself from the tzibur. Shelo yi adam roa tzibur b'tzar v'yomer lech lebeisi v'ochal v'eshteh v'shalom alecha nafshi. You can't say that. People are suffering. You say, it's not my business. I'm okay. You're not allowed to do that. Eliyeh nosei be'ol im chavero. You have to be empathic. And what does that mean? You have to pick up and carry the burden with the people who are suffering. And he quotes this Medrash Hagadol in the last two lines, Vayanosen ktefo u'misaye l'chol echad v'echad. Moshe wasn't just Vayar b'siv losam. You have this picture like when you're in second grade and you read the pasuk. Oh, he looked. Vayar b'siv losam. And he translated and he saw their suffering. So he's looking. He looks this way and he looks that way and he sees that one suffering. He's that. No. He looked and then he acted. He saw somebody struggling. He went over and he helped them. Amar, and he said, I can't separate myself from the distress of the community. If they're in distress, I'm in distress. Source number 16, right? Rashi has this beautiful, succinct formulation. He basically amalgamates like three different midrashim. It's like untranslatable. It's so powerful. Nasan einav v'libo. He looked with his eyes, and I would say like he searched with his heart to be able to suffer along with his brethren. He had the lived experience of being an outsider, but ironically, that lived experience made him empirically incapable of being empathic toward the Avdus of Bnei Israel. He wasn't part of their shibud. He never suffered the way they did. So he searched it out. He actively sought out ways to be more empathic. Now back to Yosef, it's the same story. You can almost script it. You don't have to look at the source sheet. The same naming of the child reveals everything. Veshem Hasheni Kara Ephraim. Why did he call his son Ephraim? Ki hifrani Elokim be'eretz Ani. He was the viceroy of Egypt, right? The palace viceroy. It's the same story. He could have said, I'm living a life of... No, he considered Mitzrayim to be the land of his suffering because he considered himself an exile. If the Jewish people were in exile, if they were suffering, he was suffering along with them. But even as a viceroy in Egypt, he still does the work to cultivate the capacity to be empathic, even in moments where he doesn't have the lived experience. Just share with you one beautiful comment of the Meshech Chochmah. You have it in source number 18 and 19. Remember that scene? The brothers and they don't know that it's Yosef, and they come down, and Yosef's trying to feed them, but they can't sit with the Mitzrayim because the Mitzrayim won't sit with shepherds. They can't sit with each other. And the Meshech Chochmah, you can see the whole thing in source number 19. He says there were actually four groups. Who's at the table? There's the Egyptians, Yosef's staff, Yosef's brothers. It says there's Yosef's wife and family, and then Yosef has to decide where he's going to sit. He's going to sit with the Egyptians, he's going to sit with the brothers, he's going to sit with his own family. And the pasuk says, you know what he decided? He decided he's going to sit by himself. Meshech Chochmah has this amazing line. He says, "Hello, ein ze miderech hakavod levayesh osam asher yochlu levadam al shulchano." To have other people sit by themselves while he's sitting in the company of his family, that would be terrible. So he sits by himself to feel the pain that they feel, being ostracized and being made to feel like they are the outsiders. Moshe and Yosef, the role models of lived empathy and learned empathy. I just want to share with you just one quick observation that I think emerges from this understanding. I think this explanation helps us solve a riddle that I've been puzzled by really forever. Just join me, if you will. If you have the source sheet, this is source number 20. You also know it by heart. It's the opening psukim of Parshas Beshalach. Remember what's going on? Jewish people have left Egypt, and now they're being pursued. Now they're being pursued by the Mitzri. And you could just look in source number 20, pasuk Yud Ches. You could pick it up anywhere. He took them in this circuitous way. They left. They're chamushim. They're armed. Moshe took the bones of Yosef. It's so beautiful. Except it's totally out of place. You know, all the stories in Amri Chazal, how Moshe went and sought out the bones of Yosef personally, and he schlepped and carried it. So tell me when they left Egypt, Moshe took the bones of Yosef. Tell me when they got to the banks of the Jordan, and you know what they'd had with them this whole time. It's unbelievable. Moshe had taken the bones of in the middle of where Yam Suf, stop the narrative. Just a quick reminder. I just want to let you know, for no apparent reason, Moshe has Yosef's Aron. He's got the casket. What is it doing here? I mean, what has it got to do with the price of tea in China? So I want to suggest the following. I want to suggest this explanation. Go back one pasuk. The pasuk I just read very quickly. A lot of explanations for this pasuk. B'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. The Jewish people, they left. They were chamushim. Maybe it was 5/6 died, and only 1/5 left. And chamushim, right? Rashi says mezuyanim. They were armed because they were going to have to do battle. It happens. We just talked about it 2 minutes ago. The end of the parsha, they have to fight Amalek, so they're armed. I think that's the key. I think this is the explanation. The Torah is telling us they're chamushim. What are their options? One good option, you know that Hashem is going to back you up, whatever you do. He just did all the makos. You're on your way to Yam Suf. You know you can't lose. You're chamushim, you're armed. Your aggressors who have persecuted you and oppressed you for God knows how many years are chasing you. You could turn around, take your swords, and you could annihilate them. You could exact revenge for all the oppression that you've suffered, and you could convince yourself that it's totally justified. And at just this moment, out of nowhere, the Torah says, "Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef." Moshe pulls out the atzmos Yosef. If we're going to try and find a model to teach former slaves about how to react to their oppressors, what better model could you have before you decide how you're going to treat the Mitzri? Just pause for a moment and conjure up in your mind an image of Yosef. Atzmos Yosef. You were wronged, right? This is his story. You were wronged, and now the shoe is on the other foot. What are you going to do? Is it possible? Is it possible to even develop empathy for people who have done terrible things? That is the message of Atzmos Yosef, and it fits so poetically that it's Moshe Rabbeinu because they're birds of a feather. They're both the models, the exemplars of empathy in the Torah. I have for you a few more sources in the interest of time. I'm not going to get to them, but Hashem also, and it comes from our parsha and the Sneh, and Hashem also is Imo Anochi Batzara. Hashem also says, I'm empathizing with you. I'm suffering kiviyachol along with you when you suffer, and I hope we'll have another opportunity to talk about what it means for Hashem to have empathy. So I want to circle back, and I want to close with one final thought and one final story. We have one one loose end that we still have to tie up. Why is it that the Torah has no word for empathy? Why is it that Chazal have no word for empathy? We're always talking about it. We're always talking around it. Let's learn a source together. It's source number 24. It comes from the Torah Tamima. Baruch Halevi Epstein wrote many books, many very long books, and he wrote another series in addition to the Torah Tamima called the Tosefes Bracha. And he has an amazing line. He actually says it's like a theme in the book. But he says, I just want to understand. You remember the famous Gemara in Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph? All those Hillel and Shammai Gemaras. So what's the essence of Torah? Can you just distill it in one line? And what does Hillel say? And Hillel says, right, Alach Sinei l'chavrecha lo savid. What's despised by your friend, right? Despised by you. So don't do to your friends. And the Baruch Levi Epstein, right? Makor Baruch Torah Tamimus, he says, I don't understand. Why didn't you just tell him the pasuk? Right? He's saying but in the inverse, just say the pasuk. Like just say the pasuk. It's the best you're going to do. Right? Someone started with right. That's the makor. Just say it. Why'd you invert it? He says no. It's ach mipnei sheregesh ha'ava mesur lalei. He said, if he would have said, that is a davar masur lalev. That's subjective. It's not given to legislation. You can't command. If you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it. But you can put it in. You can put it in concrete terms, and you can say what you shouldn't do. That you could accomplish. That you could fulfill. How not to act, that's something you can take home with you. It's a very old debate about whether and to what extent the Torah legislates emotions. But wherever one comes out on that issue, there's no doubt that the way we act, the way we behave, matters a whole lot more than the way we feel. We can have all the empathy in the world for the stranger or for anyone else, but until we live it, until we're noseh bi'olim chavero, until we help carry the burden, all our empathy in the world isn't worth a hill of beans. At the end of the day, the Torah is not interested in how we feel. The Torah is interested in how we act. If we say the right thing, if we do the right thing, all the rest will fall into place. So it's ima anochi b'tzara. It's noseh bi'olim chavero. It's chesed. It's everything you said. Because those are actions and behaviors, and those always matter more than the feeling, the sensation, and the emotion that we might have a name for, and we might call it empathy. I want to conclude with a story about the Netziv. Now, there are not too many people I could say this about, but my relationship with Shelley was almost entirely centered on Torah. Usually we'd speak for a few minutes after shul. Most often, Shelley would come over to me with a comment from the Netziv as a counterpoint to something I said in my sermon. Rabbi Levine, I appreciate what you said, but I just want to tell you what the Netziv said. Some of us recently spent a little time learning about the Netziv, and I mentioned that really unlike many other commentaries that we're typically accustomed to learning, the Hamek Davar wasn't really written for a general audience. The book is based on the shiurim that the Netziv gave to his students in Volozhin. So the bar to entry is very high. It was a testament to what a Talmid Chacham Shelley was, that he had such bekiyus in the Netziv. Now, the Netziv, as you know, was for decades the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, but in a lot of ways he shared his relationship with Reb Chaim Brisker. They obviously had very different styles, and they used to alternate. They would each give a shiur, like 3 days a week. And the graduates of Volozhin, they were legendary. All the gedolim of the generation, Reb Shimon Shkop and Reb Cook, and I want to tell you a story about Reb Chaim Ozer Grzinski, who was when he was a kid, he was already a prodigy. When he was a kid, he was sent to Volozhin to learn in the yeshiva. And most people go to both shiurim. Reb Chaim Ozer Grzinski, he went to Reb Chaim's shiur. He didn't go to the Nitziv shiur. A different style. He didn't go to the Nitziv shiur. Night Seder, the Nitziv used to come around and he'd make sure the boys were learning, and he'd help anyone who needed help. Chaim Ozer Grzinski, learning in the Beis Medrash, one night the Nitziv comes by and he sees that Chaim Ozer is struggling, and he walks over and says, "Can I help you?" And Chaim Ozer says, "I'm working on this Rashbam in Pesachim. I can't get it. I can't figure it out. I've been working at it. I can't figure out this Rashbam in Pesachim." And Tziv bends down, he sees the Rashbam. He says, "Oh, that Rashbam." He says, "When I was a kid, when I was your age, I struggled with that Rashbam. And I struggled some more with that Rashbam. And I lost sleep over that Rashbam. And I davened that Hashem should give me strength and wisdom, that I should be able to figure out the Rashbam. And I went to daven at Kivrei Avos and Kivrei Tzadikim. I went to the stand. I asked them that they should intervene and that Hashem should give me the koach and the capacity to understand this Rashbam. A lot of years have passed since I first encountered this Rashbam, and Ada Yom Hazeh, I do not understand the Rashbam. I can't help you understand the Rashbam that Nitziv says, but I can tell you, Ima Anochi Batzari. I can tell you that I understand what you're feeling." The end of the story is based on that conversation. Chaim Ozer switched and he started going to the Nitziv shir. That's empathy. That's the ethic in action. I'm with you. I see you. I know what you're going through. I don't have the answer. I can't solve your riddle, but I know what it's like not to know. And sometimes that's more powerful than the solution. Sometimes we can summon empathy because we've been there, and sometimes we have to seek out the opportunities to better understand. As Jonathan Sachs once put it, in general, if you seek to change anyone's behavior, you have to enter into their mindset. See the world through their eyes and try to feel what they're feeling, and then say the word or do the deed that speaks to their emotions, not yours. It's not easy. Very few people do this, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said. Very few people do this. Those who do change the world. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for the opportunity to learn Torah with you. I'm going to stay on. We'll unmute, and I'm happy to entertain questions. I want to thank Rabbi Weissman and the Beth Din, and I want to thank Hedda and her beautiful family. And I look forward to many opportunities to share Torah with you again soon. Have a good night.
Sure.
So much, Rabbi Levine. Beautiful
Thank you,
words.
Rabbi Levine. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was beautiful.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Rabbi.
And it's only 8
Rabbi.
inches high. Uh-huh.
Thank you, Rabbi.
very much.
Okay.
No
I
virtue
want you to write it.
Regards to me.
Yeah. Anything else?
Thank you, Rabbi
Read
Levine.
it.
Excellent, thank you.
So many states represented. It's really amazing. See, Maryland,
How
California,
about
Pennsylvania,
Hamilton
Connecticut.
Beach or Insignia?